Καλησπέρα σε όλους. Ευχαριστούμε που μαζεύεστε σιγά σιγά μαζί μας και σήμερα. Θα θέλαμε να σας ευχαριστήσουμε που Παρασκευή βράδυ διαλέγετε να είστε εδώ και όχι κάπου αλλού. Και έχουμε τη μεγάλη τιμή να έχουμε μαζί μας τον Χάρη και τη Λάνα Δαβίδ, οι οποίοι έχουν αυτή τη στιγμή μια έκθεση συλλέκτες συλλέκτες σύγχρονης τέχνης και τα τελευταία χρόνια κυρίως αφρικανικής τέχνης και αφρικανικής διασποράς, και μάλιστα έχοντας και μια έκθεση τώρα στο Εθνικό Μουσείο Σύγχρονης Τέχνης στην Αθήνα. I will now switch to English. The conversation is in English, so it can include all of us. I just said good evening to everybody. Haris and Lana David are collectors. They both have a strong relationship with the continent of Africa. Lana has been living and born and grew up in South Africa, while Haris spent his first years in Nigeria and now lives between Cyprus, Nigeria and Greece, and Lana between South Africa and Greece. They're both part of the Tate Committee, African Council, Tate African Committee. And they're also part of the Council of Donors or Council or Committee of Showroom. So that means they are helping a lot with public institutions. And at the same time, they're just opened a show in Emst, as I was saying. The idea of the discussion is to ask what comes next. Like what comes next after this catastrophe that we are here now, and that has put the, let's say, togetherness of the art at great risk. But I don't want to start with the bad news but mostly the good news, since you are doing things and you've been collecting for a long time. I know Haris for a long time as well. And I wanted to ask first, what made you start collecting? And in that question also, what made you start collecting mostly African and African diaspora art? And then we go about the role of the collector and everything like that. So, Hari, Lana, whoever wants to start, please.
Well, thank you, Marina. Thanks for inviting us. I want to thank you very much for this opportunity, and I want to also thank everybody who's taking their time from a Friday evening to listen to our 2 cents, to our thoughts. I've been collecting for, I believe, a bit longer than Lana. But I started collecting, I think it's a bug. So my first collecting was spending the first savings that I had straight out of college. Actually, the first piece I bought was even in my 4th year of college. So I think the bug was there from very early on. I continued, and at the time it was very different art. Obviously, it was things that I could afford, little watercolors. And I would go to the flea markets in the area where I studied in the US. And it developed from there. I liked to visit the museums, but it was very modest, very, I'm sure a lot of people have similar experiences. Now the focus I started collecting, I think retrospectively, I had in my collection from more than 20 years ago, pieces of art that were relevant to what we're doing today. So very early on, like in the late 90s, I was collecting people like Chrysophyli, like Wangeshi Mutu. This is an artist that we have very much in depth. Cory Newkirk, and various other artists, which were part of a more, it was an international contemporary sort of collection. But the focus has been, I would say, exclusive focus on African, and the diaspora has been give and take 10 years. Why did this happen? I think it was organic, and it became it came about very naturally. it's definitely the right thing to do. And why do I say that? Is because it's we love doing it. We are excited about it, and you know, in collecting, you always have your ups and downs in your process. And in this particular case, we're very much excited about building something that we like, that fulfills us, that feels right, that is explorative. It's there's a lot of exploration in that. So I'll put a little dot there, and hope I answered that. But clearly it fulfills us, and I would say, I dare to say, it fulfills me more now than when I was collecting more general international contemporary art.
Sorry for this. Lana, how did you join with this, like, with a collection? And
I didn't have the same interest in art as Harry. I have a literature background, so I was a collector, but a collector of books, I would say. My children, as they growing up, were science nerds. So when we traveled, we visit science museums and natural history museums. We did not tend to visit the art museums. When I met Harry, I followed him around for the first year or two, quite mystified at contemporary art and trying to understand it. And then one day I saw with the new eyes, and it clicked for me, and I began to become very passionate and follow Harry around more, you know, more intensely, and I have the bug too now. So I would say going on 5-6 years now, I definitely have the bug, and it's something that we enjoy doing together. We travel on the continent. We you know, it's our children are grown, and so it's something that we have time for now as well, which helps.
And now that you're going to traveling, and as we've been now from the flea markets to a kind of a more serious traveling, to museums, to now I have to ask, what happens now that our travel is suspended? And how do you think a collector would, or you, I mean, because every collector, I guess, is different, you would be continuing being around art, because as I understand, you are not the collectors that, you know, you don't have kind of close relationships with the artists you are collecting.
Our relationship is, we're quite close to the continent. So we go on quite a few trips, and we go to studios, to museums. We like to meet the artists or the gallerists. Depending on who it is, it may be at the deeper or more shallow level. But there's definitely a lot of exploration involved. First of all, the particular sector of art that we collect is very thin in bibliography, very thin. The history of contemporary African art is quite shallow, so we're learning, and we're building the database as we go along. So we have dual roles of discovering and learning together with, I mean, even our art consultant is learning alongside us. It's not, you know, it's very different to collecting Western, if you may, or more, you know, Western contemporary art. We think we know the artists that we follow, and we know it's quite easy to continue following them in the years of COVID. So, let's say like a Wangeshi Mutu, we have a deep understanding of her work. I'm taking her example randomly. But so it's very easy, if we see her work, to follow, and to, let's say, if we were to acquire a piece or to follow what she's doing, it's okay, we can still do it because we understand her, we know medium, we know the deliverable. It's not the same with a young artist. So if you call me tomorrow and you say, Harry, I have a great artist, there's young, etc., you know, I may have an initial feeling, but it's very difficult. It's not the same, because if I don't have that first view, the first feeling, the first experience with that artist, it's very difficult from a photograph or from a Zoom call So yes, for artists that we know, it's okay. We can handle it, let's say, as collectors online through an email, through a good photograph. But for young artists that we like to support and to discover, that's much harder. If you don't see them in situ, my feeling, if you don't see them in situ, if you don't see the work, it's much harder. So I believe that will suffer more. I think more the young artists will suffer more than more established. That would be my guess, or at least that's how I would react. I would react to seeing work virtually.
Having said that, though, I mean, through the medium of Instagram and other social media, and a lot of us being on lockdown, I think we all had a lot more time to spend I mean, we have come across young artists on Instagram and said, oh, this is someone that's interesting, let's put him on our radar. And actually, we have made 1 or 2 acquisitions of young artists, and you know, there's time on your hands. I think that's the big difference, that we have sort of investigated new ways of looking at artists, and for me it's fascinating how powerful Instagram has been on that. And so that, you know, apart from the more established artists, I think in that respect, and we have a group on a couple groups that we belong to on WhatsApp. And if we're quite generous with information, we're a very, very sharey group. And if any of us hear of new young artists, we post about them and we chat about them. And I think that's really helpful as well. So
I think this is, I mean, it's actually very correct what you're saying, both. This is, from one hand, you miss the experience. I mean, John Dewey also spoke about this experience that you can only have in front, philosopher and pedagogist, in front of a piece of work, and it's completely something that you cannot replace with something else, because there is an aura that comes from the work, that it's irreplaceable. On the other hand, the ecosystem, yesterday the director of Reina Sofia, Manolo Borja Villel, was saying that how the ecosystem has to survive, no matter what the museums have as collections, and the public museums will survive eventually because the state and the archival work, there is this kind of contemporary production that it's very hard and has to somehow find ways of survival. So I was thinking, on that extent, how do you cope without having this museum experience? What do you do about that currently?
Well, we like to believe that this thing will go away. We like to believe that sooner or later people will travel. I mean, even if COVID continues, we like to believe that in the new year, people will survive until the new year. I think we can all manage. So I like to be positive and to think we'll be back to our normal way of life early in the year. So I would like to believe that the ecosystem will survive until then.
But I think in the meantime, museums can adapt too, and maybe forced to adapt. They're sort of our centers of culture. Galleries will be our centers of culture too. They almost will become, I mean, they'll become more localized, I think. And so that they'll almost become like cultural community centers. I mean, the focus will be perhaps, oh, you can't bring all these international artists from another country, so let's look around what's local. Maybe each museum now will have more of a local focus for a while. And that might, you know, sort of adapt and change. That might have some positive outcome as well. You know, who knows how long this will continue.
Yes, it's exactly, we are diving in this uncertainty. Of course, the locality is a kind of course, museums have a local responsibility, and this locality is kind of interesting, you know, term. On the other hand, can be quite problematic, as many museums are also discussing, because we are a kind of a global realm. We are a kind of a global kinship, let's put it that way. Even an African collection is international from another perspective on the same time, of course, as artists are international. And this is something that might be at risk in the moment. And that's why there are somehow an adoption of museums, collections, or cultural centers. And there, I will go to the exhibition you're having right now in EMS that opened within COVID. For the people that they hear us and they don't know what EMS is a national museum in Athens, currently open, but you know, with a troublesome history of like fully functioning, and also the kind of operation you undertook to make a virtual way of visiting the show. You worked with a bunch of international curators that didn't travel here. You put up an international show of very high standards of pieces of your collections, and you provided a series of guided tours yourself, but also a virtual an experience, a possibility for a virtual experience. Do you want to speak a little bit about that, Bundu?
Well, I think that's very interesting, and I think it follows on with the previous discussion we're having. So when we were first invited to show at the museum at EMS before COVID, we were already planning openings, you know, an opening show, having people visiting from South Africa, from New York, from LA, from London, people who were relevant to the African art world.
The artists,
the curators, museum directors. A lot of people were interested in what we were going to show. And along the way, thank God, you know, we're quite versatile and flexible. And in this particular environment, we had to be. And so we turned our interest, and what we did was we didn't do any formal openings or parties or books. So we have no paper trail at the museum. So all our effort went into having an online presence. So we focused a lot on creating a website. It's actually called the Harry David Art Collection.org. And in addition to that, we've added a couple of applications that help in documenting art. We didn't do that. We found some applications. And we also have a virtual tour. So somebody can go through the website and have a virtual tour of the show. Now, is it the same as being there? No, it's not the same. We know that. But we know that hopefully people who will appreciate, and we want to share our collection. So we're very happy that partly people can be in the middle of nowhere in any country you want to choose, and they can, if they have internet access, they can actually virtually walk through the collection. For us, that was the most important thing, to share.
Internet makes it democratizes the show. So it's a world leader or someone with a cell phone in the middle of Africa who goes to their local, you know, Wi-Fi center can see the show. So that was important for us. Yeah.
So the other benefit, the additional benefit was the environmental impact. It's as you know, thinking about it, we have no paper. So we consciously said, why do we need paper? Because everybody said, oh, you need a pamphlet. Oh, you need a book. Oh, you need, you know, something to live with. Why? I mean, if somebody wants it, they can print it themselves if they really want it. We'd rather not. But now you can document it with your iPhone or whatever phone. You can have a virtual tour. You can't be there, and it's working. You know, so there are some benefits. It pushed us. Let's say, if we were to be introspective, it pushed us to look at new technologies and get out of our comfort zone in some ways.
Well, it was in March, April, May when we were talking about doing a book, and that was the time. I mean, relative at that time, people were saying, you know, COVID is on paper, COVID's everywhere, don't touch anything. So, you know, it forced us to rethink things, and we're happy. I mean, you know, I think COVID has many negatives, of course, but it has been a reset button on a lot of things, and I mean that in a positive way as well.
I think what is happening with the technology right now is that it's becoming slowly, in a way, hybrid, meaning that you have this kind of uh, distance or avatar experience, but it's much different than it was before. And as we were discussing before, just briefly, you made also some private tours in Zoom, which is a kind of an interesting also outcome. And I wanted to ask you, since you have now the site and the virtual tour together with the site, have you ever thought maybe to continue on doing events that they are not necessarily on site, but it's mostly online, involving the collection? Is something that it's in your mind, or for the moment you don't think the kind of a route towards that, as they call it, phygital dimension, which is physical.
What's it called? Okay, physical.
Digital.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, I mean, we'll be very happy to do for interested groups, you know, particular, I mean, we like, again, for us, it's very important to share the art in one way or another. So in our small capacity as collectors, if we can share either, yeah, I mean, that has been the motto of what we do. We like to open it when we find the right thing to do. So we have done physical tours of, you know, ourselves. We've done from people, let's say, friends of museums, we've walked them around, but even students who have shown an interest, students from the art academies in Athens who we didn't know, and they just reached out and they said, will you show us? For us, that's the biggest satisfaction. The fact that young Greek art students are interested to look at something different, and that they reach out and they make an effort. For us, that's the most important things. And we love doing those. So whenever we get an opportunity, you know, in small groups like that is what gives us great pleasure to do. I mean, as we were saying earlier, Marina, yes, we recently walked with an particular art group. We did a virtual tour of the collection, which was a first for us. You know, with cameras being followed around, but how else do you do it? I mean, it's
and we had a Q&A afterwards, which was really nice. So interacting with whoever was, you know, watching from the Zoom call. So it's all a new experience for us. I mean, it's our first exhibition, and also we're learning as we go.
Yeah, like everybody in the art world right now. And what about the art fairs? Do you miss not going in the art fairs? Have you been going quite a bit in the art fairs? Or maybe not?
Well, we don't miss it. I personally, maybe Lana has a view. I personally don't miss, I mean, I don't miss traveling. I used to travel every week. And I don't particularly miss traveling right now. I mean, I probably will miss it sooner or later. What I miss is that I can't see the art. So that is an issue. So if I am to look and explore and find new artists, it's problematic. You can only commit so much to an artist. I mean, you can see something and know that you like it, but that would be an exception. But to really follow and discover, you have to go and meet people. You have to speak to the artist. You have to see his studio. You have to see his work. You have to physically get a. Yeah, I mean, for a year we can all live with this. I don't think anybody has a problem to live with this for a year or a year and a half or however we need to. But sooner or later we need to go there and walk the continent. And particularly in African contemporary, you have to be there.
And now the role of the collector in some broader senses. I mean, there is a lot of discussion, of course, in this ecosystem, and this is how also I plan my talks, with having this talk to conclude in four, let's say, focuses on artists, galleries, museum directors, and collectors. And so how do you feel yourselves in this broader ecosystem? One thing is, of course, you collect your art, you like what you collect, you live with it. But somehow the role of the collector is much more fundamental also and entangled with all the experience of the art. I don't want to define it myself. I want to ask you both how you feel as part of this kinship and your responsibilities too?
I mean, as a collector, you're collecting because of a love and a passion. But through your collecting, you're supporting artists and you're supporting galleries and you're supporting the industry. So the harsher side of that, the realistic side of that, because for us, it's passion. It's hard. I mean, what do you say? Keep buying, even though times are hard. Investing in young artists, living artists. I mean, especially amongst the African American community in artistic community in the US, there's this real push. I mean, it's hashtag support living artists and this, and support curators perhaps. I had an interesting conversation with collectors yesterday who are training young curators and then for like a 3-week course, and then are making their collection available to these curators that have just gone through a 3-week training. So, there's discussions on what is the responsibility and what can you do within the limits of COVID. Having said that, we put up a whole show and we set up rooms either digitally or literally with WhatsApp, with the curator in London saying, move it 2 centimeters right, move it 2 centimeters left. Of course, it was easier for us to put on a show because all our art was our own. We weren't requesting pieces to be on loan from different spaces. I mean, it's the responsibility. Some collectors during this may not have the financial wherewithal to collect as they did before. I think it's just the responsibility of each collector to do that little bit that they can, whether it's supporting young artists or creating programs for curators, or each doing what they can.
If I may to add, I mean, we've consciously decided we don't want to build a physical space. So at least it's not in our conversation. At least right now, we're not interested in having, let's say, walls or a space to show the collection. So we prefer to support a museum that wants an artist. So if there's an artist that interests us and we think is important to be in a particular museum, we are very happy to consider supporting. So we've done that by helping museums buy artists of interest. Also, in addition to that, we lend, which is an easier proposition. If we have an artist that we have in the collection and the museum wants to borrow, that's a very easy decision. I mean, that's a given that we do. And as we go along, we like to, I think our focus will be on the soft, so let's say supporting a curator who wants to travel in Africa and help discover or support or develop the ecosystem, if that makes any sense, rather than, again, invest in a building. I think there's a lot of buildings out there. A building or a site for showing a collection can be anything. It can be from a museum to a gallery space, to a football stadium, to a tent out in the garden, to anything. I mean, there's a lot of those buildings. So I don't think we can make any difference in that. I think there's a lot out there, very important buildings. And I think if we are to do something, would rather support a curator or an artist directly rather than so that is at least our decision to go down that route.
Yeah, I think what you're both saying, it's quite important for 2 reasons. One is not having a building, of course, is a conscious decision, but also there is a lot of discussion of all these private foundations and how somehow take out the, let's say, the experience of places that are more openly and more public. So I think for me as a curator, what you're answering is also a kind of spreading your wings or sharing your collection in a much more radical way with a broader society, which is kind of interesting because it's not only here or not only there. And this is my next question. Since you're living between places, do you feel tied with your collection to not tie it thematically because that's obvious, but tie it with showing the collection to one place more than another? Or do you feel kind of, you know, or with the museums? I mean, I don't want to do the question very direct, but, you know, where do you associate more with what you were saying on somehow?
We never expected to show in Athens. Okay, so it was never, ever, never crossed our minds that we would be showing, especially the first show of the collection, a part of the collection would be in Athens. Having said that, the fact that the National Contemporary Museum, like EMS, had the courage, the open-mindedness to invite us, I don't think they exactly knew what they were inviting. I think they had a, you know, they thought they, you know, they heard there was a collection that is different, that's more relevant to immigration, that's relevant to minorities, to equality, to
in a broader sense.
In a broader sense, to, you know, all these issues that are very relevant in our society today. So I think the fact that they heard there's a collection that could be addressing all these dialogues, because African contemporary art can engage a lot of dialogues. So how can you say no? I mean, when they invite you and they give you 4 white walls, and they give you that authority to do something creative, how can you say no? And we didn't say no. It was quite an easy decision. Again, we didn't expect it, but we, you know, I mean, that's the beauty of art. I mean, you have to be creative. I mean, we're not creative, we're not artists ourselves, but maybe that was our spark to be a little bit creative ourselves.
Also, the question will be why to say no. Yeah. And
well,
and
look,
course,
you could say no. You could say no if you thought that somebody would stifle the concept, right? So since nobody tried to impose, let's say, something, why not? And then it's a great effort. I mean, they're trying to open again the EMS. So I mean, if you can support, okay, we don't collect Greek art, but does it matter? I don't think that's relevant, what sort of art you collect. I mean, I think the role of these institutions is to support anything that's interesting that may spur a discussion, right? It doesn't mean that everybody will like what we collect or what we're showing, but I think part of the, I mean, it has to be a dialogue, it has to be a discussion, it has to be openness to accept and to see something. You don't necessarily have to agree, but that's what we liked about it, that the museum, that EMS was open-minded enough to say, guys, come and show your you know, and create the dialogue.
But I would think also it's, I mean, who is the modern Athenian, or who is the modern citizen, or who is the contemporary citizen of the planet anyway? As we were saying before, the collection might address these issues and much more, because there are artists that are of international allure. I mean, they are internationally known. They are like collected by major public museums, not necessarily in Africa or in the US only. So of course we are talking about an international collection, but if you look at the amalgam of citizens in Athens, and the new citizens, mostly in Europe, maybe they would feel legitimized by seeing works from, you know, a continent that their parents, if it's the second generation, are coming from. So that's also, as we are a kind of a fortunate, unfortunate, and altogether crossroad of a lot of people passing through Greece right now in the borders of Mediterranean Sea and eastern, southeastern side. I think that show has many reasons to be important right now. Then I wanted to ask you also a few things about, if I don't tire you, about how you thought of the strategic plan of the show, how you thought of inviting 5 curators instead of 1, dividing the rooms. What was like, how these ideas came really? Because the more the merrier, but yeah.
Well, we didn't want to curate it ourselves because we don't think it would be fair. First of all, it's not a show of our collection, so we didn't want to do that. And we didn't want to invite 1 curator because I think that would have taken probably a lot longer time to organize. We just, looking back, we were invited in November, I believe, of 2019, and we were supposed to open initially in April.
May 8th.
Well, April, and then it became May 8th.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for those of you who have set up exhibitions, you know, you don't create a show in a few months. That's impossible. So we thought, let's have a more pluralistic, more democratic process, and that's how the process was. So we said, okay, let's have a village, a little village. We'll invite 5 curators, and initially, you know, when we discussed it, somebody said, okay, we would be curating one of the rooms. And then I said, I don't want to curate a room. I mean, I don't want to be the collector of my collection to curate a room. That felt awkward.
And who do we leave out?
And who do you leave out? So
They're
we said,
like
no. We said, we're happy to leave it to 5 people who we respect and trust and who are in a different capacity in the art world. And we gave them carte blanche. We gave them the collection when we allowed them to each create. I mean, what we controlled, if I may use that word, controlled, was we hired we engaged an architectural office. One of the partners, the senior partner, is actually from South Africa. And they created this concept of the kraal and the village with the 5 rooms. And then we just gave a room to each of the curators, and they individually presented their own personal story from the collection.
And we gave the central room to the artist, which is the heart of the village and the heart of an exhibition. So,
which was Rashid Johnson.
Rashid Johnson.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting that you say about the village and the kinship, because I remember one of your curators is focusing on the book of Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart, the classic. And one of the classic quotes in that book, if I may remember well, I'm not gonna tell it exactly how it was written, is about the togetherness, in the sense that every man of the village and woman of the village, men back then, could see the moon or have food to eat in their own houses, but they should meet all together, because it's not about eating together or seeing the moon together. It's about just being together. That's good for a kinship. So I think if I compare a little bit what you've been doing in the show, you created this kind of polyphony through your people that are close to you. One of the curators, the Kindle Space, is also a collector, or I'm wrong with this?
Yes.
Yes, he's a collector. Actually, he's a collector, and he's Burkhard Warnhold is also, he has converted an old brewery in Berlin and into an art space called the Kindle. So we like the reference that, that's a brewery, as the same way Fix was converted into Emst, which was an old brewery. So, but he's a collector of not African art. He loves Africa for other reasons, because he has created an orphanage in Africa, but he's a passionate collector and loved the challenge of this dialogue with his own brewery in Berlin.
Mm-hmm. We don't have extremely much time left. So in that time, I'm gonna ask you a few maybe more personal questions in the sense of the collection, always, not personal. And I wanted to ask you, from your collection, do you have your favorite pieces, and do these rotate? Like some weeks is one, and do you want to share it with us, or it doesn't work?
That's difficult. You're asking us to say which is our favorite child.
Okay, very good answer. Let's say, which is the favorite piece for the week? Even with children, you don't.
Well, if I may, I think from the show, from Ubuntu, there's an artist who, in many ways, covers a lot of the elements of the story that's been told through Ubuntu. And I think Lauren Halsey, who's an African-American artist from Los Angeles, in many ways represents that spirit. She's an artist that grew up, and gets inspired in a very, very underprivileged part of Los Angeles. She comes obviously from such a background. And if you visit the show and you have a look at her work, which is it's a massive cement sculptural piece with the little dioramas,
yeah,
encompasses a lot of the elements of what art inspired from Africa can be. So in this context, if I'm not choosing, so
yeah, okay.
I didn't choose a piece, but I think that piece actually represents a lot and includes a lot of elements. Funnily enough, it was chosen by Rashid Johnson, who has the central room of the show, and that particular piece is in the center of the central room. So, by chance, maybe, I don't know.
And it was here, it was right here, and it moved from here to the museum. So now it's been replaced by this Kendall Gears piece, as a few of the pieces left our home to go to the museum, so we've replaced those. But it's a very evocative piece, and even when it was sitting here, it was a big conversation piece, and everybody wanted to have a good look and chat about, and you came through and we talked about
even touch it.
Yes.
And how often do you change the installation of the works in your house?
Yearly, probably every year. Yeah, not probably, every year. Yeah.
That's a lot, yeah.
Yes.
That's a lot of work. And now, before closing, and since we are broadcasting from Greece and Athens, I wanted to ask you if, and since with this collection, you're very also concerned of the Black Lives Matters and support, artists that are now contemporary. Have you come across any African diaspora artists in Greece or in Athens for the moment, or any?
So, surprisingly, we have. Yeah, surprisingly, we've recently. I mean, there's a lot of talk of artists and galleries that want to come and set up in Greece. So it seems that there's something happening in the art world.
There's a good buzz in Athens, for sure. It's a good place.
Good buzz. I was asking, any Greek black artists that you are aware of?
Greek. We don't know any Greek black artists, but I mean, recently
we'd love to hear if they were, but we haven't.
I'm sure they may be, but I know there's a couple of. There's a
Joy
Labinjo and Chioma Binama, who are showing at Breeder.
And
Otobong Ganga, supposedly.
She has a private space here that she has opened, which we haven't had a chance to see yet, but we'd like to.
I'm sure there are other artists, but those are three that very recently we heard that are somehow interested in Athens.
And Larry Osei-Mensah, who is from the US, from New York, he's I think he will be co-curating the Biennale of Athens. Yeah. So
yeah, I think this is quite interesting also in relation to the second generation and all the efforts that I think they call it Generation 2.0 are doing for assuming Greek citizenship here, like second generation of.
Yes.
And what is the next plan before closing? Is there a plan right now? I mean, it's too much to ask. The show just opened, it's going until November. Maybe you have a plan to do something while the show is open. Is there something that you can share with us or not for the moment?
I don't think there's anything planned per se. Currently, the show will carry until March. And some have asked us, are you considering this particular show to travel? We haven't, we heard that. We've been asked that, but we don't have any plans.
I think
our
it's
priority is to be able to go back to Africa and be able to travel and see artists. I think that's probably the priority. I think there's, I think that for the ecosystem, I think travel has to open again. Otherwise, it's, especially on the continent, it's problematic if travel remains constrained.
Waiting then for the travel. I mean, this time the wise travel is, apparently we might have left a lot of footprint and maybe unnecessary travel on sometimes, but the wise travel, and then see your next plans after these travels or your next works. For sure, we're gonna meet again in the show, since it's open until the end of March, you said?
end of March, yes.
18th of March.
Yeah.
18th of March, and I hope, actually right now the museums are a good place to go, since most of the crowds don't really go there. I think it's a great time to have a kind of a very introvert experience with the arts.
Yes, indeed.
And fruitful. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. And let's meet in Ubuntu, next appointment. Thank you. Good night.